Today was the hearing day, the day they'd been building up to for weeks. He wasn't nervous, there wasn't room for that. He was Jungkook, the man who worked for his company since the age of 23, and it's been years he built out his empire with his blood sweat, and this case was already won in his mind. Even though they won't get any result today, it will take months to solve this case. Either way, his lawyer is prepared. Yoongi might get on his nerves, but he was damn good at what he did. That was enough. Sliding his hand into his coat pocket, Jungkook pulled out his keys when a movement caught his eye. Wayne was a few feet away, standing by her car not unlocking it. When did your car get back from the workshop? His hands slipping into his pockets as he neared her. He didn't saw her at breakfast or even this morning when he woke up. He assumed she left early, but now here she was, casually by her car. Yesterday evening, she replied, letting out a sigh of relief. Thank God. I couldn't bear another day without it. He raised an eyebrow. Tired of going in the same car as me already? Her hand froze on the door handle, she turned to him, her eyes narrowing. Do you find every opportunity to start an argument with me, or is it just a special talent of yours that I don't know about? A smirk made its way to the corner of his lips. Just testing the waters. You're the one always ready to take the bait. She let out a sigh, rolling her eyes but deciding not to feed into his teasing. Are you nervous? Nervous? He let out a low chuckle, in a cocky tone. I'm Jungkook, nervous isn't in my vocabulary. She raised an eyebrow, that's a long-winded way of saying no. It's not just no, he said, resting a hand on the top of her car door. It's never, today's just another day. Yeah. Another day where millions of dollars and reputations are on the line, sounds relaxing. He shrugged, well, kind of. All I have to do is show up and let the facts speak for themselves. You know what they say, truth always wins. Her jaw ticked, wherever you heard that, it's wrong. Truth doesn't always win. Manipulation, power, money, that's what wins most of the time. He blinked at her, that's a pretty cynical take. Is it? It's reality. Simple yet cruel. He could see it in her eyes, the kind of understanding that came from witnessing the worst in people. And she wasn't wrong. He's seen it himself countless times. As a CEO, he spent years watching deals fall apart, alliances crumble, and rivals claw their way to the top using any means necessary. He's seen his father wield power like a weapon, crushing opponents not with truth, but with influence. Money could do anything, it could buy loyalty, silence, and even justice. You know, with takes like that, you'd fit right in with my board of directors. She gave him a side eye. Always find a way to make everything a joke? Not everything, he shrugs. And beside, I'm confident because I've got my lucky charm with me today. Wayne raised an eyebrow, didn't take you for the guy to believe in lucky charms, but may I ask what's that? You, he said simply, flashing her a cocky grin. She blinked, staring at him like she couldn't believe the words that had just come out of his mouth. By the look on her face, she was officially done with him. He loved that look on her. She didn't let her guard down often, but when she did, it was worth every second. He never been the type to crave someone's company for long, he liked his space, his independence. Hell, most people annoyed him within 5 minutes. But she was different. His wife was an exception, a glaring one. She brought something out in him, something he didn't even know existed. The part of him that wanted to make her laugh, to tease her until she glared at him with that fire in her eyes, to protect her from whatever made her face grow cold when she talked about the world. She brought out the cheesy side of him, the side that made stupid jokes about stupid, lame, lucky charms. Or that part he wanted to say something sappy just to see her roll her eyes again. My breakfast is about to come back up. You didn't even eat breakfast. Then it must be the coffee. His laughter was deep and unrestrained, echoed in the parking lot as she opened the door and slid into her car. Go, she said, glancing up at him with a pointed look. Or you'll be late, as you say, he replied with a small mock bow, watching her start the engine and she drove off. It was funny, really. He never thought himself the type to care about these small, but moments. But with her, every second felt like something worth remembering. Jungkook car pulls up in front of the courtroom, its glossy black finish reflecting up the pale morning sun. He sits in the back seat, as he scrolls through some articles. Beside him, Yoongi was deep focused on some files, his tie slightly loosened. Starting my morning without coffee, his fingers tapping against his knee. I'm going to pass out any minute now. And that's your fault, by the way. Jungkook doesn't look up from his phone. My fault? Yes, your fault, Yoongi glared at him. You were knocking on my door like an animal this morning. I didn't even get time to dress properly. Good thing we're going to court and not a wedding. Nobody cares how you look. If I don't dress like a proper human being, no one takes me seriously. He adjusted his tie. And it's not like I had much of a choice. I went to bed late because of you. Again, your fault. Don't blame me because you're bad at time management. Yoongi scoffs, leaning back in his seat. Kid, I went to bed at 5 in the morning. I barely got 3 hours of sleep. 3 hours. You'll survive. Yoongi he lets out a dramatic sigh, shaking his head. Out of all the clients he had, Jungkook was the cold bastard he has ever encountered. Jungkook exhales through his nose, placing his mobile down. Let's. He opens the car door, but before he can step out, Yoongi hand grips his elbow, stopping him. He turns, his sharp gaze falling on Yoongi. What? Yoongi's smirk is gone, replaced by seriousness. Whatever happens inside, do not lose your temper. Leave the talking to me. No sudden outbursts, no showing off. That infamous John temper. Got it? Jungkook stares at him, his face void of any warmth or humor. His silence lingers just long enough to make Yoongi shift uncomfortably. I mean it, Yoongi presses. I don't care what they say or do. You don't open your mouth unless it's absolutely necessary. Let me handle it. Are you finished? Jungkook asked him icily. Without waiting for a reply, he opens the car door and steps out, adjusting his coat. Cold bastard. Yoongi muttered under his breath as he followed behind. His eyes landed on someone at the courthouse entrance. Well, this just got a hell of a lot messier. God save us. The courtroom was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. Jungkook was sitting with his back straight, shoulders squared, and his face was a cold mask. He could feel the weight of everyone's stares. They all knew who he was, and he made sure they saw nothing but confidence in him. Yet, there was a tension in his body that even Yoongi could feel. His eyes flicked to the opposing side of the courtroom where Seo and his legal team were setting up. Seo had the audacity to grin in his direction, a smug expression that made his jaw tighten. Jungkook knew this was not the last he had to see his face. There were more trails coming where he had to bear listening to all this nonsense along with the bastard face. How sweet, right? He doesn't hate Seo just because of the lawsuit or the underhanded tactics Seo used in business, but because that man always been a thorn in his side, always trying to outmaneuver him, to drag him down. And now, here they were, in court, with the media waiting to pounce on the outcome. The whispers in the courtroom were constant, faint murmurs filling the space like background noise. People were waiting, watching, speculating. He ignored it all. His eyes moved to the judge bench, still empty, then to the jury box. He could feel Yoongi beside him, reviewing papers and saying something to himself. Yoongi always worked best under pressure. The door to the courtroom opened, and Jungkook barely glanced at it. More people, probably. Or reporters trying to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. He didn't care. But then, the murmurs started. Quiet at first, then growing louder like a ripple spreading through the room. He frowned. What the hell was everyone whispering about? Lifting his gaze, he let his eyes scan the courtroom. It didn't take long for him to find the source. And when he did, the first time he entered the room, his expression changed. Yn. She walked in like she owned the room, head held high, heels clicking sharply against the floor. Posture flawless, expression composed, not a hint of hesitation or doubt. She looked untouchable. What the hell was she doing here? She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be at her office, handling whatever boring cases lawyers dealt with. But no, here she was, walking down the aisle like it was her goddamn runway. Maybe she was here to give him something. Some file, some evidence. The last hope he clung to as he watched her. It was stupid. Because that hope? It drowned, dragged under like dirt, swept into an unforgiving tide. Because she wasn't heading toward his table. The table she was heading to. Not his. The opposing counsel. A bitter taste filled his mouth as realization sank in. She wasn't here for him. She was here against him. His wife, his damn wife, was representing Co, the man he was fighting in court today. The murmurs grew louder around him, and he could hear snippets of conversation. Is that attorney YN? She's representing Co? Wow, this just got interesting. His grip on the edge of the table tightened, his knuckles turning white. His jaw clenched as his eyes followed her every movement. She stood at her place, setting down her files and speaking briefly with Co. The bustard leaned in with a smirk, saying something that made her nod. His chest burned. All the emotions crashed inside him. Anger, betrayal, hurt. But despite all that, his face remained blank. The judge entered the room, and the murmurs died instantly. All rise. He didn't take his eyes off YN, even as the judge took their seat and began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to begin the trial of John Industries vs. CO Enterprises. Both parties will have the opportunity to present their cases. I expect professionalism and respect from all involved. The judge's voice faded into the background as his focus solely remained on her. YN. How could she? She was his wife. She knew what this meant to him, how much he despised Co, how important this case was. And yet, she was standing there, on the other side, not even sparing him a glance. Yoongi nudged him. Jungkook. Pay attention. He tore his eyes away from her and looked at Yoongi, you knew, at which he simply shook his head. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may begin. Yoongi stood, buttoning his jacket and giving a reassuring pat on the shoulder. His gaze drifted once again to the other side. She was focused, her attention on Yoongi as he began. Her face was betraying no emotion, but he knew her better than anyone. He could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers tapped lightly on the table. She wasn't as unaffected as she seemed. But does that change anything? Why didn't she tell him? How long has she been working on this? Is that why she never told him about his cases, always told him that it was confidential, because living under the same roof she was fighting against him? Does she even care what this means for us? Yoongi was speaking, laying out their case, but he could barely focus. He wasn't used to this feeling of being caught off guard, of not knowing how to react. He was prepared for every moment. Everything but this? The judge turned to the defense. Counsel for the defendant, your opening statement. YN stood. His hands curled into fists under the table, his nails digging into his palms. Enough to draw blood. But he couldn't care less. Your Honor, members of the jury, Jungkook didn't hear the rest. He hated it. He hated the way she was so calm, so composed. He hated the way she didn't even glance at him, as if he didn't exist. And more than anything, he hated the way his chest ached every time he looked at her. Because the more she'd speak, her words stung somewhere at the corner of his heart. Pulling and twisting. His wife. Representing the enemy. His wife choosing to become a stranger in that moment. He didn't know whether to hate her or, no. Hate wasn't the right word. It was hurt. Pure, unfiltered hurt. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to care at the moment. The gavel slammed, dismissing the court, and YN exhaled quietly, gathering her papers. Her hands moved on autopilot, organizing her files, closing the briefcase, and keeping her expression as neutral as possible. But inside, she was fuming. The trial gone exactly as she expected, and Seo's team spouting half-truths while Min Yoongi fired back with facts that clearly weren't enough to tip the scale. She didn't miss the murmurs in the room or the stares from across the aisle, especially his. His eyes been on her the entire time, burning with accusations that she wasn't ready to face. It was all so exhausting. The sooner she got out of this suffocating room. Stepping outside, she squinted against the sunlight. The cool breeze should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Her irritation and desperation only grew when she scanned the area, looking for one person. She spotted him near the parking lot, standing tall, as perfect as he always looks. Even from a distance, she could see the stiffness in his posture. She started walking toward him. She have to explain. She didn't know how, but she have to say something. But before she could reach him, they swarmed her. The reporters. Microphones and cameras were shoved in her face as a barrage of questions hit at her all at once. Attorney Kim. Are you representing Seo Enterprises in this case? Was it difficult to go against your husband in court? Do you think your relationship with Mr. John will affect the case? Does this mean your marriage is in trouble? Her clenched my jaw, irritation reaching the boiling point. Yet she forced her expression to remain neutral, but inside, she wanted to scream. Excuse me, she said, trying to push past them, but they only crowded closer, their voices overlapping in an unbearable cacophony. Let the attorney through. She has more important things to do than entertain your questions. The familiar annoying voice spoke behind me, smooth and smug. She didn't turn around to look at Seo. The reporters still didn't step aside, and she forced herself to make her way out of the annoying noises, keeping her head high, ignoring the flashes of cameras and the murmurs following her. When she reached the parking lot, Jungkook was already gone. His car was nowhere in sight. The knot in her chest tightened. She let out a slow breath, trying to ease the tension in her shoulders, but it didn't help. Everything about this day felt wrong. Unpleasant. Suffocating. She knew she was walking a thin line, that her actions were painting her as the villain in his eyes. But there was no other way. She had to do this. This was her job. No, make sure the witness statement is submitted before the deadline. I don't want excuses, just get it done. She glanced at the clock on her desk as the person on the other line spoke. Midnight. Her back aches, from how long she'd been sitting here, looking over case files and laptop. Yes, I'll review the documents first thing in the morning. She hung up, finally leaning back in her chair. The dull ache in her back has spread to the neck, she rubbed at it absently while standing. Her stomach growls and protest, she haven't eaten properly all day. Jungkook still didn't return to his room. Walking toward the kitchen, haven't seen him since morning, coffee, even though she knows it's the last the hours stretch into the night. He still hasn't come back. Too much caffeine isn't good for health. Part of this point wonders where he could be, but she pushed the thought away. As she reached the kitchen, not to dwell, but something made her footsteps slow down. Jungkook is already there, sitting at the island, a glass of wine in one hand while the other scrolls through his phone. He doesn't look up when she steps inside, but she knows he senses her. The way that his fingers pause for a fraction of a second on the screen gives him away. And his eyes just lifting a little just to confirm. Then, he dismissed her presence entirely, he lowers his gaze back to his phone. She bit the inside of her cheek, swallowing the urge to say something. Instead, she forced her steps to walk towards the counter. She focused on the simple motions, reaching for the mug, switching on the machine. But then she realized the drawer with the spoons is right next to him. Of course, it is. She hesitates, glancing at him. He's still focused on his phone, scrolling or reading, that she can't tell and don't care to peek. I need a spoon, she said softer than intended. Silence. You're in my way, she added, this time a little louder. More silence. He was acting like I was a ghost. Closing her eyes briefly, she forced down the frustration. Fine. If he wants to act like a wall, she'll deal with it. Steeling herself, she steps closer, so close that her knees brush against his thighs. His body tenses, though, just slightly. Enough for her to notice. She ignore it. She have to. Reaching over him to open the drawer. The back of her hand pressed against his stomach as she pulled out the drawer, the warmth of his skin seeping through his shirt. He stilled completely. The tension in the room was suffocating. Her fingers wrap around the spoon, and she pull it out, letting the drawer slide back. She turned back to her mug. The drip of the liquid into the mug fills the silence, but it doesn't drown out the tension in the room. You shouldn't drink wine on an empty stomach. She finally said. It's a guess, really. He wasn't home all day, and knowing him, he probably skipped meals. But there's no response. Are you really going to ignore me? She wasn't someone who is impatient. If someone ignore her, they can as much as they want. They can go to the grave with it. But him. It was affecting her. More than it should. His fingers finally stop scrolling. Slowly, his eyes lift to meet hers. Those eyes were cold and empty. He's never looked at her like this before. The Jungkook she know, the one she married, the one who always has a teasing comment or an intense gaze that makes her knees weak, was now looking at her with those cold eyes. The intensity is gone, replaced by a wall so impenetrable it sends a chill down her spine. This is the Jungkook he reserves for his office, for the business world, for people he doesn't care about. Not for me. Jungkook, about today, she start, the words catching in her throat. She don't even know what she want to say, what she can say. But she hated that look on his face, that coldness in his eyes. He doesn't give her a chance to figure it out. How much? The question stuns her, slicing through whatever words she had ready. It's not just the question, it's the way he says it, the way his voice drips with something venomous. What? She blink, her breath hitching. How much did he pay you? The words spill out of his mouth without hesitation, and they felt like a knife aimed directly at her that she almost flinch. Almost. But she was quick to collect herself, straightening her spine and lifting her chin. You think I did it for money? Oh, right. Of course, you wouldn't, a sudden bitter laugh escaping his throat, as though the answer has just dawned on him. You talk so high about morals and values, so obviously it has to be something else. Something that's important. So tell me. His voice dropping to a low, venomous tone. What did he promise you that I couldn't give? Her stomach sinks, twisting into a knot so tight it feels like she can't breathe. Don't, she still managed to say. I know you're angry, but don't accuse me of something you'll regret later. His jaw tightens, and he sets the wineglass down on the counter with more force than necessary. Then, he stands. She held her ground, even as he closes the space between us, until the tips of his shoes brush against hers. He's so close now, the warmth of his body brushing against me, but like other times there was no warmth in his eyes. I'm not accusing you of anything. His calm voice was razor sharp, I'm simply asking, what is it? Explain how my wife, the person who's supposed to stand by me, is defending the man who's trying to destroy me. That you didn't even think twice. You knew what taking this case would do. You knew how badly it would. He stops, his jaw clenching. How badly it would mess up our marriage. She say nothing, just listening as he let out everything. But do you even care? His voice softens, but it's worse somehow, more heavier. Do you care about us? About this marriage? She grips the counter harder. Don't say anything, he says, his mouth curling into a bitter smile. Because I think I already know the answer. Her tongue feels heavy, glued to the roof of her mouth, but she forces herself to speak. You don't know anything, Jungkook. Don't I? He narrowed his eyes, tilting his head like he's analyzing her, dissecting her every move. You stood there, on the other side of that courtroom, and didn't even look at me. Not once. So, tell me, what am I supposed to think? Her lips part, but she can't find the words. How could she explain? Tell me, YN, he presses, what the hell was worth it? She opens her mouth, searching for an answer, but nothing comes. What could she say? The truth? That wasn't an option. She knows he's waiting for her to explain, to give him something, anything. But her chest feels heavy. It's my job, Jungkook, she finally said, meeting his eyes. His jaw ticks, his expression hardening further. She thinks she sees something in his eyes, hurt, disappointment maybe, but it vanishes just as quickly as it appeared. Of course, and just like that, he steps back, his hands falling to his sides. Your job. He turns on his heel, walking toward the door without another word. And all she can do is stand there, her chest heavy, her heart aching in ways that she didn't think it could.